Portland. What's going on in Portland? Something is amiss in Portland. It has to do, obviously, with federal or what purports to be federal officers running around in paramilitary gear, throwing people into unmarked vans. I even heard one report that they're rental vans.
Rental vehicles.
Yeah, rental vehicles. How would either one of you react? I have a serious question about this. If I'm out on the street and a rental van pulls up unmarked and two guys in paramilitary fatigues and long rifles start walking towards me.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes to the essence of the issue, doesn't it? It goes to whether or not there is a legitimate threat, or one perceives a legitimate and imminent threat to life or safety, and is thereby authorized under the law to take protective or defensive measures. And that's one of the issues that I think comes up immediately, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And there seems to be a split of authority on that. I mean, depending upon where you are. As we were discussing earlier, clearly the 11th Circuit would see no problem with this, that if someone looks like a police officer and is acting like a police officer, then the public's on notice that they are police officers.
How about this?
Well, the 7th Circuit seemed to disagree and said, there are very few occasions where a police officer should not be identifying him or herself. At least on June 3rd, when this paramilitary unit first made its appearance in Washington at the Lincoln Memorial, when they were asked questions by people that saw them, they would say that they worked for the Department of Justice or the federal government, but would not say what department they work for or give their names. In this particular instance, they're not telling anybody anything. And from what we hear from one person who was picked up and thrown into a van and taken to the federal building, into a room, the people that talked to him even there never disclosed who they were, never allowed anyone to see, never allowed him to see a face. Interrogated him for 2 hours without Miranda. And then when he finally said, "I want a lawyer," it was at that point that they waited a little bit, and then they threw him in a van, took him back out onto the street and let him go. So clearly they were concerned at some point with his rights. So there's some very serious Fourth Amendment issues of people who may or may not actually have authority.
So if I'm getting this correctly, and excuse me for laughing, but they were okay with Fourth Amendment seizure violations.
Yes.
What tripped them up was a Sixth Amendment right to counsel request.
No, it was a Fifth Amendment right to counsel. It was a Fifth Amendment right to counsel under the Miranda decision. And that's where he's at that point, because the Sixth Amendment is inoperative there, because there's no adversarial criminal judicial proceedings that are taking place. So Fifth Amendment right to counsel. And they apparently were concerned about that. They tried to get this guy to confess to all kinds of things. And he was saying, I don't know what you're talking about. And finally said, "I want a lawyer." At which point they chose, after a short period of time, to put him in a van and dump him back out onto the street. I'm surprised they didn't throw him out while it was moving. But they literally let him go. This seems to have happened more than once. They're grabbing people and taking them to the federal building.
Well, I'm glad to hear that they perceive some constraints on their behavior. If it's a request for counsel, I guess that's better than nothing. But how long is that going to last? It's
not very.
Yeah.
Not very.
Well, let me ask you this. Because when we were talking before, we were talking about the 11th Circuit. Which I take it has to do with immunity, right? Qualified immunity.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It does.
But anyway, let me get to the more basic point. If the 11th Circuit is saying if you look like a police officer and you're behaving like a police officer, then whoever you're interacting with is on notice that you are a police officer.
That comes from the 11th Circuit in the Hamilton case.
Yeah, but isn't the argument here that we've all seen the video of this. These people do not look like police officers. They have the word police written on their paramilitary gear. They
Yes.
look like they do not look like police officers. To me, they look like Michigan militia, right? The types of people who were storming the Michigan Capitol because they have to wear face coverings. They were not behaving like police officers. They operate in silence. I've never seen a police officer behave like that, right? People are standing there saying, "Who are you? What are you doing? Who are you? Who are you with?" They will not speak.
What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing? Use your words. What is going on? Who are you? NLG will get you out. What's your name? Tell us your name.
How are we supposed to know who you are? How are we supposed to know you're not kidnapping us and you're civilians kidnapping us?
They silently approach whoever their target is. They take that person into captivity and drag that person into an unmarked rental van. Is this, even at the 11th Circuit, a precedent doesn't seem to cut in favor of, to me, of what's going on here.
Well, again, the Seventh Circuit has been all over the place on this, and they've spoken louder than any others. And they said, although some unusual circumstances may justify an officer's failure to identify himself, in rare cases, it's generally not reasonable for a plainclothes officer. And remember that basically they're plainclothes because they're not wearing a uniform, identifying uniform, to fail to identify himself when conducting a stop. However, there is some chance that an officer could be denied qualified immunity on the basis of failure to identify himself. And I think at some point, even these officers who let this guy go that we know of were concerned about this so-called qualified immunity issue that I'm sure that they've been instructed on, that if someone really starts asserting their rights, let them go. And this was nothing more than this was basically taking prisoners and trying to get intelligence information. That's all this was. It was clearly a military operation.
Now let's explain to everybody what qualified immunity means. Police officers have qualified immunity. Right. In other words, when you go after them personally for being liable for violating your constitutional rights, they have qualified immunity, meaning they're immune as long as they didn't. They're not violating clearly established legal principles.
And they're acting in good faith.
Right. But let me ask you this: if I'm going to try to penetrate that qualified immunity, if I'm going to go after an individual police officer for violating my rights, don't I have to know who that police officer is?
Yes, you do, and that's part of the problem that these people are running into, is that they don't know who the officers are. They don't even know what department they're with. You're suing the United States government, and the government is saying, we don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
Right. And they're not wearing their names, right?
No.
They don't. The head of DHS says, no, I'm not going to make them wear their names on these paramilitary outfits that they're wearing, because these dangerous protesters then will target them if they know their name.
That's the whole point, isn't it? The anonymity is the whole point. They're never, the federal government is never going to give these people up. If push comes to shove, they're going to deny that it was a federal operation and just bury the whole thing, right? So ultimately, I think a lot of what we're talking about here is premised on notions that the federal government is acting in good faith, which it clearly is not.
But the problem also with this is that if these people who are dressed saying police on the front of their flak jackets that says police and that's their only identifying mark, it may very well be, and this could be an issue, they may not really be certified law enforcement officers with the federal government. As we discussed earlier, there is a possibility that these are people who have been, quote, deputized, but don't have the authority to wear a badge. They don't have the authority to call themselves police. We have some enforcement agencies with the federal government that actually are not entitled to make arrests. They're not entitled to call themselves, they call themselves police, but they're really not police. And we have, that's already existed in the past. So it's very possible, as we talked about, that these are not real law enforcement officers. And in fact, that's why they're not wearing the markings, because then the question will come in if one of them gets manhandled, and it could happen, one of them gets grabbed and taken someplace and they find out he's not really a federal agent. Okay, well, why were you doing this? Well, I was sent out there by the Department of Justice. How so? And those kind of things could happen. So they don't want them having any markings because they don't want to violate the law in what they're doing, even though they're violating the law in what they're doing.
Yeah, this is what happens when a government operates in secrecy. I mean, this is Banana Republic stuff.
Yes.
Now, first of all, I want to mention with the failure to wear a name. Somebody tweeted this morning, a veteran tweeted this morning that he had engaged in close-in combat with the Taliban. And at the time, he was required to wear his name on his uniform because that's the way we do it by ourselves, even when we're fighting an enemy on the field. And the notion that these people, this temporary head of DHS, whoever this joker is, the notion that we can't have people wearing their name tags on a street in an American city because for fear of retribution, but we can send soldiers to go fight against the Taliban, okay, with their names clearly marked is unbelievable. But I want to ask, Jeff, you were a judge in Florida. A student asked me this, and I want to pass this question along. If I'm driving on a highway and it's late at night, and a vehicle approaches from behind me and starts flashing lights at me, indicating that I should pull over, and I don't think that this is a police officer, what are the rules about that? If you know.
The issue would be if you don't stop, could you be charged with fleeing and eluding?
Right.
And the answer is this: if you are driving along on a lighted highway, you go to the next exit where there is an open gas station, you pull into the gas station where it's well lit, and it's at that point that you actually stop. You do it slowly, go under the speed limit, make it clear, hang your hand out the window so that the officer knows that you're acknowledging that they're there. And while you're driving along, make sure that you're not trying to flee and elude the officer, that you're driving slowly and going to a protected place. The other thing you can do is call 911, say you have what looks like a police car behind you, but you don't recognize the markings or the lightings, and tell them, what should I do? They're going to tell you to go to a place like I've described. They will also they'll try to find what department it's from and verify for you whether it's a police officer or not. And or drive to the police station. If you're near a police station, drive directly to a police station.
Good. So the reason I ask that, because people watching this might say, what the hell does this have to do with anything? Doesn't there come a point where you do not have to pull over if there is not, if the vehicle that, I mean, because there could be a real bad actor, right? If let's say somebody pulls up beside me, rolls down the window and says, I'm a cop, pull over. No way.
Without proper lighting or markings or any other type of identification, the answer is the same as I just told you.
So see where I'm going with this?
What?
You see where I'm going with this?
I see where you're going, and we'll get there. Okay. Right. But my answer to you is that you should take the least confrontational method of getting yourself out, exculpating yourself out of the situation that you're in. For example, we on Bayshore right now, the police are driving gray Chargers that have literally no markings on them, literally none, but they have these incredible number of lights that they turn on. The car lights up like a Christmas tree. Okay. They're clearly police officers. Okay. And they're all uniformed officers, by the way. They're not plain clothes.
So they're not renting vans from the nearest rental place?
Enterprise.
Right. See, this is what I'm getting at, right? I mean, because I'm trying to bring it back to Portland.
Okay.
Right. You've got rental vans, right?
Yes.
With people dressed up like stormtroopers, not police officers. And I'm trying to get at how are citizens supposed to interact with these people?
The word police written on the front of your flak jacket to me, is not a reasonable identification of the person who is accosting you.
Right.
There has to be something more, a patch that identifies what department you're with, some sort of identification that clearly goes beyond just saying police, because I can make a patch that says police and put it on anything I own. Why are you acting secretly? I just see too many people turning their heads to this and closing their eyes and don't want to talk about it. And as we talked about earlier, it's up to the media to expose all of this. And they're treating this as a third segment story or a fourth segment story instead of where it should be. As bad as COVID is, this absolutely should be the lead story. Absolutely should be the lead story.
Yeah, when this type of thing is going on the streets of a street, we got a problem. Now, your discussion of local police raises another problem, which is that these federal agents, at least some of the reporting I've seen, is that they haven't told the local police that they're there. Local police departments don't know that where they are, what they're doing. Can you imagine being a patrol officer, maybe a state trooper in Oregon, and you come across a scene where two people in paramilitary outfit costumes and a rental van appear to be kidnapping somebody off the street? Now, what are you supposed to do? You don't know that they're federal officers.
No, you don't. A couple of days ago, actually, up until a couple of days ago, it wasn't that they didn't know what they were doing. The local authorities didn't know what they were doing. They didn't even know they were there.
Right. Well, and doesn't this incentivize the alt-right, the lunatic fringe, to actually go ahead and do this? I mean, now they know. All I have to do is put the word police, right, and on my my little costume that they like to run around in, and rent a van, and I can go and start, right? I can go and start a violent confrontation, right? And I start grabbing people off the streets, take them God knows where. I just don't understand. And Dan,
I think our last two scenarios have clearly been the source of conversation between the governor and the local authorities and the Department of Justice, and which is why they filed the suit, because the governor said, "Get your people out of here. They have no business doing this," and the feds have said, "We're not going anywhere."
Well, and Donald Trump has said that if local authorities can't get these, thugs and criminals, as he would call them, off the streets, then he'll do it for them. So apparently he's going to try to do that, which raises all kinds of. I mean, the whole idea that the federal government can take over local law enforcement. So much for the 10th Amendment, so much for police power. And then, Dan, I was going to ask you, because we were talking before we started recording, this really all comes down to the rule of law and what's left of it in the United States.
Yeah, and we really are, I think, in completely uncharted territory here. It's difficult in the age of Trump not to paint things as existential crises. But under these circumstances, I find it difficult to say anything else other than this really is, in my view, an existential crisis. We want to, you and I, all three of us, we want to discuss this situation in constitutional terms, applying norms and rules and standards and procedures that we are accustomed to applying to the government. But that's not what we've got going on here. All of those norms, all of those rules, the customs, the constitutional standards and procedures, they are out the window when the government acts anonymously with the purpose to sow doubt and confusion and terror among the population. And that is what's going on here. I don't understand how this is not front page national news that has captivated the attention of everyone because it very clearly is an existential crisis. We cannot talk about this in normal terms because the norm presumes that the government is acting in good faith. And that's not what's happening here. This is not the government, the federal government, acting in good faith. This is bad faith conduct. And so for us to presume that our normal ideas of due process and Fourth Amendment rights apply here is, I think, a fundamental mistake. None of those things apply when the government sets out to act anonymously and in bad faith. So I wish I had answers. I wish I could tell you, here are the premises from which we should be making and building these arguments. But I don't know what those premises are, because what's going on is completely antithetical to everything that I've understood the government should stand for, period.
And in terms of the federal judiciary performing their, hold on a second.
Even Laney's pissed off about it.
Yeah,
I mean, Laney gets it, for Christ's sake. Laney gets it.
Yeah, Laney gets it. And Dan, I guess, to that point, that leaves us wishing that the federal judiciary would fulfill its obligation, right, its role in our tripart government. But maybe there are some questions about that as well.
Well, I would like to think that there are at least some judicial actors who will do that. My concern is that those judicial actors who have the final say, to wit, the United States Supreme Court, may or may not be counted on to do the right thing here. It seems clear to me, based upon a series of events that have taken place over the last several years, that this Supreme Court is okay with efforts at things like vote suppression and upsetting and unbalancing the basic democratic norms that, once again, our conversations like to presume. When we find ourselves in a circumstance like this, where the basic democratic principles that we all rely on to make sure that we're operating on a fair and even plane are in question, then yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot of confidence that the system is going to work the way that it's supposed to.
But what happened in Washington and what happened in Portland, Oregon, drew very strong comparisons to, believe it or not, this group called the Little Green Men, who appeared in Crimea of Ukraine in 2014, shortly before the occupation, and sowed the fear and the terror that they were intended to sow. And what bothers me is that, and I keep saying this every time this administration does something, that it's a rehearsal for something else. It's been very deliberate. It has been very step by step. I know I sound like the right-wing conspiracy theorist, but if you look back on it, the only thing I can tell you is that anybody who studies history will tell you that if you don't learn history, it is bound to repeat itself. Okay, that's the way it works. All one has to do is invest, 4 or 5 days of reading and read one book. There's just one book you need to read, and everybody hates these comparisons, but I can't help but use them. Okay, you need to read William Shirer's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. That's all you have to read. And everything that happened during that period of time from 1923 through 1933. You didn't have to read the whole book. Just read through 1933 and everything that's happened, okay? Whether it's the alt-right going out there with their weapons and being brown shirts, whether we have a new Gestapo in the context of this unidentified military unit created by the Department of Justice, supposedly, whether it is step by step, everything that's happening, this is by design. It's an outrage. We get over it. We move to the next step. It's an outrage. We get over it. They move on to the next step. It's an outrage, and they keep moving piece by piece. Okay. And people just don't want to see the pattern. And every time you mention Nazi Germany, they say, but he's not anti-Semitic. Well, he doesn't have to be. All he needs is a boogeyman. And he's found his boogeyman. Okay. He's got the left wingers. They're a boogeyman, and they're the new communists from Germany in 1930s. No matter what it may be, it's black people instead of Jews. It's immigrants. Okay. All of these things are by design. Donald Trump himself is not smart enough to do this, but he's smart enough to buy into it, or dumb enough to buy into it. And he's smart enough and dumb enough to let people do these things as long as it benefits him.
Okay. One of the things that I think we should make an effort to do here is to, in addition to letting people know what's going on, is letting people know what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do right here, right now, today, tomorrow, about this situation? First thing you must do is inform yourself. If you don't know what's going on here, if you're not paying attention to this, then you can't help. If you do know what's going on here, but you are not absolutely outraged and fearful to your core, then you just don't get it. This is an existential threat. This is how it happens. Make no mistake about it. So what can you do? The only thing that you can really do is take reasonable steps, or perhaps sometimes unreasonable steps, to make your voice heard. Contact your state and local elected officials. Contact your federal elected officials and make your voice heard. Participate where you can in peaceful, nonviolent protests to make your voice heard. The only thing that authoritarians like Donald Trump and company understand is a force that is greater than their own. And the only way they're going to understand that message is if you take steps to make your voice heard.
Well, and to the point that sometimes, discussing these things, it almost makes you sound, not you, but makes one sound like a conspiracy theorist. Unfortunately, in the times we inhabit, that's the nature of the beast. All you have to do is recite what's actually happening, and it sounds unbelievable. It sounds like you must be experiencing some kind of fever dream.
Yeah, it sounds alarmist, like you're always making existential threats, but that's what's going on.
Right. Right. And
sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
that's right. And I think that fundamentally, one of the things that's absolutely happened that I couldn't have even imagined happening until this administration is the total breakdown, the collapse of the wall between politics and law. And particularly, the idea that a president would be directing the Department of Justice what investigations to open, what investigations to drop. I mean, if Barack Obama had tried that the first time he was caught, he would have been impeached and removed from office. But this is now, it's just the routine. It's the way it is. And Dan, I think you've said it very well before. That if the question really is whether the rule of law exists anymore and whether anybody cares.
Well, there's the divide between law and politics that you point out. There's also the divide between truth and falsehood that seems to have lost any meaning whatsoever. There is no regard for fact. There is no regard for truth. Nothing is true or knowable. It's all up for grabs. Well, I don't know how you're supposed to engage in a meaningful, principled discourse with people who feel completely unconstrained by facts and truth.